Our next speaker today has come all the way from New Delhi to be here with us at the INZBC Summit. Bharat Joshi has a varied career spanning the roles of entrepreneur, author, social worker, and mentor. Bharat is CEO of J-Curve Ventures. He also serves on boards of Associated Container Terminals Limited and Joshi Konoiki Transport and Infrastructure. The companies have interests in logistics, technology, and infrastructure. Bharat is the recipient of multiple awards for his contributions in philanthropic, academic, and business pursuits. And he is, of course, a very good friend of New Zealand's. Now, hopefully you will all be aware that Bharat has also written a book called Navigating India, the $18 trillion opportunity, and it is, in fact, out there for sale. And I understand he will be sharing with us some insights from his book today. Bharat writes at the beginning of his book that if you don't end up buying his book, and indeed maybe this advice also is relevant in case you don't take anything away from what he's about to say, then he wants you to ensure that this advice is taken to heart. Stop subjecting your captive Indian audience to the ABC formula, laboured conversation on astrology, Bollywood, and cricket. And he says, please stop doing the head bob. All sage advice, although I will say that the head bob is very infectious and difficult not to do. But I'm sure Bharat will also be sharing with us even wiser advice and insights today. So Bharat, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Esther. Hi, Commissioner Pardeshi, Ms. Radhakrishnan, MP, friends in the audience, and my illustrious friends on the dais. Good morning, namaskar. Kia ora kamihi ki te tono, maikia au I kone. And from now, I'll speak in English, otherwise it will be difficult for me and painful for you. I just arrived from Delhi a few hours ago, so if I misspeak or if I forget something, please indulge me. So, okay. So I am expecting errors of both commission and omission. I'm delighted to be here, and when I was asked to speak and I was given this topic, this topic, I asked Gary, so what do you want me to speak on? And he said, well, here we are, speak on trade policy, diplomacy, culture, and of course, you must speak from your book and, live examples and India in the region and the world, about New Zealand and India. And I said, great, so how much time do I have? And he said, well, take your time, 9, maybe 10 minutes. So I said, well, okay, so I'll try. But then I also took a small liberty, which was to slightly tweak the topic. And instead of connections, I'll speak on connectivity, if you allow me. There are lots of buttons on this. Okay. There are 2 green buttons. So very briefly, this is what I do professionally. We're in the logistics business. We own and operate trains, trucks, dry ports, ships. And then we have some asset-light businesses, freight forwarding and so on. And then J-Curve does what I call the business of the 3 I's, insight, investment, and implementation. And this is essentially advisory. Some investments are mostly advisory consulting work for both foreign governments and for foreign companies in India. Now, you're of course all aware of this, but connectivity essentially enables all 3 of the topics I'm supposed to speak on. Trade, the people piece of it, as well as the new digital pieces. We have come to take for granted the affordability of merchandise. Now, no matter what you take in terms of physical goods, whether it's food or electronics or whatever, today, in absolute value, in relative value, in any metric, it's cheaper than it was a generation ago. And we have come to take this for granted, which is enabled by connectivity. And connectivity happens, of course, through the physicality of it, but also through policy. Digital connectivity is extremely important. It's today important because it enables the physical connectivity, whether it's e-ticketing for people who travel, or it's the customs systems that need to talk across borders. And of course, this is something India knows a little bit about. What Susanna will speak to you about later is, of course, the cultural piece, and you've already heard the diplomatic piece from High Commissioner Morton. Extremely important. Okay, so in India, Mr. Dhillon was talking about, you know, the, how people sometimes look at India as one market. And in my book, so that's me speaking about my book now. So in my book, I talk about, people would enter, or investors or marketers would enter the EU, not taking for granted it's a single market. They'd have a different strategy for Spain, a different strategy for Germany, a different one. But India somehow is one market. But bear in mind, if you were a retailer, where would you put coconut oil? A simple example. Now, if you're in the West, in West Bengal, you would put it in the cosmetic section for hair oil. If you're in South India, from where Ms. Radhakrishnan's family comes from, Kerala, this would be what? Cooking oil. So, so small and big examples of like this are important. Also, if you look at the relationships which have now become very successful, it's important to recognize and nurture our common heritage. But India's biggest trading partners are those with which we seemingly have nothing in common with. And our Commonwealth brethren, unfortunately, have vitiated the advantage that they had over the last few decades. It requires work, and this happens through a lot of track two work. It happens through a lot of people to people exchanges. It happens through chambers of commerce, um, and bless you, and so on. Economic corridors are absolutely vital to a lot of this happening, especially in our part of the world, because we cannot take infrastructure for granted. And I'll come to this in a couple of slides. This, of course, I'm stating the obvious here. What are the challenges to all of what I've said, what we've taken for granted? Now, trade tensions are very much on everybody's mind. We're also very concerned to see which way things will fall. But are there any winners? And instinctively, I'd say no. But there are winners and losers emerging already. There are countries that are doing well, even in these circumstances. Also, you see not only trade lanes and these value chains, but also the way you manage business is changing. I'm sorry, I'm speaking about Japan maybe too frequently, but 2 or 3 Japanese companies are using India as their pivot for most of, at least for our greater neighborhood. Panasonic uses India as the supply chain as well as the administrative base for all of Africa, all of the Gulf, all of South Asia, including India. That's billions of people in terms of an addressable market. Daikin does the same, Suzuki does the same. Again, we are short on time, but I'd love to take this conversation offline and talk a bit more about this. Again, developments are both in terms of the hardware and the software, as I call it. The hardware is all of this. It's the Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, which is a $100 billion investment. It's the DFCs, dedicated freight corridors, which are embarrassingly small in comparison at about 10 or 15 million US dollars each. We are getting the first bullet train or Shinkansen in, I think, 3 or 4 years now, depending on estimates. And very quickly, these are the regional projects on the ground today. The only project on which we are cooperating with China right now is the PCI MEC, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar Economic Corridor. Is there a pointer on this? Or anyway, please try and look at the various corridors as I speak. An even longer corridor is within India, connecting the east and west, Gujarat to Assam. There are also multimodal corridors, including this corridor that goes across the Bay of Bengal, short sea shipping to Sitwe in Myanmar and then back to, uh, to India via Myanmar. So, as business people, what is it that you can do differently? Now, there is a lot of talk on FTAs, but please pardon my candor. But how many of you already have an existing strategy of what happens if we were today to sign an FTA? Do you have a strategy already? So, if you do, great. And if you do not, then you need to. I'm sorry, I'm telling you what you need to do, but let's be very serious about how we can have tangible outcomes. The High Commissioner spoke about outcomes and recommendations, which I appreciate. But two or three suggestions from my end in this coming year: have a budget item for India. So many visits to India, so much of boots on ground, so much of these things are important. I'm sure some of you are aware that already India has an extant FTA with ASEAN. So if you already work with ASEAN, why don't you involve that as part of your value chain? Of course, honoring rules of origin and other terms. But there is already some low-hanging fruit which can be addressed. And I'd be, for one, very surprised if in your business model there is no potential in a non-FTA environment. Anyway, I'd love to talk more, but I'm out of time. Indo-Pacific already has been spoken about. You also perhaps need to de-risk because China's slowdown, of course, is a long-term phenomenon. It's not something which is going to pick up next quarter or therefore thereon. And I think I've covered most of these points. And sorry, Gary, I couldn't fit it into 10 minutes. And as I should remind myself, timing is key. I should have stuck to the time frame. But for you, timing is key, which means, as the Romans would say, carpe diem, seize the day. And the day is now. Thank you so much.